We are engaged this month in a series based on the book Finding Yourself in Transition by Robert Brummett and our own experiences. It's based on our own experience. For indeed, as one person said, life in the world of form is all transition. The world of form is always moving, fleeting, changing. And the unfortunate news for the egoic or little self is it's not necessarily moving to suit you. But it is moving for a deeper, more wonderful purpose, and that is to awaken us from fear, which, of course, has manifested in much of humanity as an attempt to control things that are uncontrollable. So we're looking at it both from the point of deep and eternal spiritual principle. Deep, deep sounds like a measurement. There's no measure. Eternal principle, unvarying principle. And that's the first characteristic I feel wanting to be expressed here. This immutability of spiritual principle. If spiritual principle is not immutable, non-varying, eternal, ever-present, always true, then we have nothing to count on. Certainly we have learned by now that the world of form is not necessarily, any particular form is not necessarily the place to invest our sense of wholeness and well-being. So there has to be something that doesn't change. And spiritual principle, in essence, tells us that we can never, ever, ever experience anything except consciousness, our states of consciousness, our beliefs, or the reality beneath those beliefs. We're always looking at it. We can't make the world, if we work at the world of form without a new state of consciousness moving through us as we work at it, then we cannot really get a much better result. We may get a different result or a temporary achievement. So, understanding and coming to the end of the sort of childlike idea that I can somehow use spiritual principle to make the world what I want it to make seems critical. The word critical coming from crisis, meaning opportunity with a little danger mixed in, using the Chinese symbol. This is the time. It's always the time now. The sort of hard part of that law, and it actually comes from the idea, the word spiritual law comes from the idea of the Mosaic law, which we have used in modern day metaphysics. We've said essentially what it means is as within, so without. States of consciousness are always what manifest. So ultimately it tends to move us, at least initially, in the direction of what can be done to alter my state of consciousness, rather than getting caught trying to change that without a new state. And there's no question that we are all in the midst of not just an ordinary transition here, it's a rather extraordinary one. Look at what's happened here at this church, and if you looked at it through this body, you would now see that your entire world of form is different than it was even dreamed the possibility of 6 months ago. I had never thought of living in Birmingham. I had never, the whole thing was completely beyond me. And yet, I live next door. Here I am. So, there's some getting used to what's really at work here. And a lot of us think the transition is what causes something, the changing events, but it's not really the case. The changing events reflect something that happened inside of us all first. We're not getting over the previous minister's death. We helped participate in bringing about. It was an event and circumstance that rose from the collective source as a result of what it wants to do. And what is happening now is it is reflecting what it is attempting to bring forth in awareness. We have to get first things first. And if we start believing that the outer world can somehow be a cause, we're confused again. The outer world is always result. This mosaic story upon which this book is based is really that story in a blueprint form. I'll reiterate a few of the pieces of it in a moment. Right now what I want to say is, it can have some bumps in it. The old rules don't apply. That's what's happening. When there's a transition, structures that we were invested in that appeared to be external to us, which really already had their source within us, fall away because the internal structure dropped away. Something within us calls for this. Something within us all knows that this is all being orchestrated by something larger than us, and that its purpose is deeply, profoundly spiritual and meant to be enriching and enlightening and awakening. There are no outer causes. We're not trying to solve the problem of, what happened in the outer world. We're trying to come to terms with recognizing that there is a deep spiritual unfoldment occurring in us all, and its result is what we're looking at and seeing at each moment. So in all these bumps and surprises where the old rules don't really work and the old structures that we were invested in are not all there anymore, the call is to rely more fully on something, not another belief system, but something beyond beliefs, something vital. I don't feel called to come here and give you a new set of belief systems or structures. That isn't what moves me. First of all, I don't think we're separate. I think we're all the same being. And when I heard the Daily Word this morning at first, I thought she said, instead of receptive, I thought she said respective. And I thought, respective, to be in this role and look at you and presume that I know what's right for you or what you should believe, to me seems less than respectful. Someone interviewed me for a little while this week. It resulted in a small article in the paper, and the one thing they really got right, was that I was saying, I'm called as a person, I guess, to suggest the possibility that this can be a place where you're allowed to have whatever beliefs you have. They're not particularly important to me one way or the other. Because beliefs are like sacred cows, like the golden calf that they built out there in the wilderness. They're the booby prize when it comes to awakening. We're not looking for a new belief. We need to know what's true from within us. That liberates people from having to invest too much power and authority external to themselves. Bosses, wives. I won't go into the societal leadership, but rather than believing that someone out there can fix the external world, which is the seductive message, which isn't true, we will start to realize, I am the truth. This is ultimately what Moses goes and finds out, isn't it? I am that I am doesn't mean new words, titles for God. That's a pointing to the ever-present, underlying and infinite, invisible beingness in us all. That would be my hope for all of us, that we could sense this power, start to feel it living us. Let the old fearful structures fall away. Don't make a new golden calf. Don't grab a new belief system. No matter how valuable you see the belief systems that get us to this point are, ultimately they don't work. That's what a transition is, when the way it used to work doesn't work anymore. And if we become disoriented, which we do when that occurs, at times confused, disenchanted, we've been enchanted with a way, a belief we had that really did work. We may have grown to cherish it, fallen in love with it, but it was still a belief rather than this power that doesn't have a name that you can name. If you name it and you believe the word is it, you've already limited it again. I am that I am means this present vitality that is breathing us. And that's why to me, authentic spiritual teaching is a call back to this within you. The new earth is not about making new spiritual kings and priests. The priesthood era is over, and gurudom, for the Western world in particular, is confusing. Somebody said guru means G, you or you. So this is frightening to the older self that we used to be invested in and believed in, that speaks with the word I. It quakes. What do you mean? I am the only responsibility, but wouldn't it be mercy to tell you if that were the truth and you were busy trying to fix things any other way and it wasn't working for you? Not to deliver the message would be unmerciful. To treat you as a child not ready to emerge into spiritual adulthood and realize you're it. There is no external power. Ever. Anywhere. There is no external authority. And every message where somebody else sets themselves up to promise to solve your problems for you, and you invest more fully in them than your own wisdom, then you give away your power and authority and you lose yourself again. It's not wrong. We all have done it thousands of times. We'll do it again to some extent. But the job now, spiritual maturity means to come home and start living from here. And there's no time to do it but now. You can't put it off. If you see that putting it off means guaranteed more difficulty and unconsciousness and problems where you misunderstand the real solution, then you'll stop quickly. You'll say, wait a minute. These spiritual teachers that tell me I need to come into the present moment, open to the present moment, this infinite beingness, this is what the Christ means. It's not, as I've joked before, Jesus' last name. It's a title where this power begins to vibrate in a body and becomes a light of the eternal truth, the fulfillment of the Mosaic or spiritual law. So to lower the intensity level for a moment, I have a little story I'd like to tell you about some of the bumps and surprises that can happen. And if we're living from here and not necessarily reinvesting in how we think it should be, we may have some more surprises. We may not know what this new territory looks like. A couple of guys from, how many people here from Chicago? This is not personal. Every time I tell a story and it's got somebody from some town that, is the brunt of the joke, I'm from Chicago, they'll tell me after the service. I'll say, well, too bad. But this is not personal. A couple guys from Chicago decided they'd had enough of the city life and its craziness, and they determined that they were going to go to the country and ranch or farm. And they picked Texas, so, they moved to Texas. And first thing they thought they needed was a mule. So they visited one of their neighbors to ask if they had a mule they could purchase. The guy looked at them and kind of discerned where they were coming from, that they were new to the territory. He said, no, I don't have a mule at all. He said, well, they visited a little bit, a little neighborly chat, like we do in the country, talk about the weather. These two city slickers saw the big pile of watermelons up against the barn. They asked the rancher, so what are those? The rancher, perceiving their naivety, said, oh, he said, those are mule eggs. Mule eggs, they exclaimed. He says, yeah. He says, you take one of those home, and when it hatches, you'll have yourself a mule. So they negotiated a fair price, put it in the back of their pickup, headed down the bumpy country road. Remember, all stories are stories that happen within us all. all the characters and all the parts are representative. So as they're driving along, they hit one particularly big bump, and turns out the watermelon bounces out of the truck and hits the ground, breaks open. The guy the one driving noticed it in the rearview mirror, started to turn the truck around. Meanwhile, a great big Texas jackrabbit saw that watermelon sitting there in the middle of the road, and he hopped quickly over there and began to feast on it. As they turned around, they saw this long-eared creature standing there eating watermelon, and one of them says, "Our mule! Our egg is hatched. We have a mule." They jumped out of their truck and began to go after the jackrabbit, and as is the custom with the big Texas jackrabbit, he took off in a great big circle with these two Chicagoans chasing after them, and after a while they began to be just winded, and they fall to the ground, and the jackrabbit hops off into the distance. One of them leans up on his elbow and says to the other one, "I guess we lost our mule." "Yeah," said the other one, "but I'm not sure I wanted to plow that fast anyway." So in this new earth, there are bumps and surprises, and we must enter it with a great deal of naivete, and there are lessons to learn. And one of the lessons is you really don't have to plow that fast. There's a whole lot less of the me needed to bring forth this new consciousness. It is the consciousness of beingness attempting to clothe itself and attempting to find form through you and me. But the you and me is a relative term, through us. This is the ground of our shared being. There are, as Bob Brummett likes to outline it in the book, 3 stages to transition. One is an ending that looks like it happened out there. But really, he points out quite carefully in the book, something ended within us. Something collapsed within us. Something shifted. And then that ending, that collapse, appears as something that used to support or sustain or work for us just being gone. And as consciousness moves toward a new beginning, there is a relative period, which he calls the void. You could call it the desert. And it is filled with some characteristics that, if in order for this power that is our true being to become more conscious, we need to watch out for. We need to look. The reason psychotherapists know that the first rule is to be really fully present with an appreciation of your process, not to hurry it. There's great love in the fact that we're not trying to move you along, but be present for you and honor your process. But we also do not want to limit how long it's going to take by assuming, sometimes I hear people say, it takes X amount of years to move through this or that. Well, that's intended to be a way of giving you space and time and not hurrying yourself, maybe. But we want to be careful that we don't create that limitation either. We live in a novel, new time. Transitions may be quite accelerated now. If we find that we are moved through a transition into a new way of being rather rapidly, we'll be okay with that too, huh? Yeah? We say huh in Texas, meaning yeah? I could use some help with this. I'd rather not fall into the belief that it's me up here being a star. Really. So, and then there's new beginnings. Well, all of these really started within. It's not a seamless move. We never, the surface mind likes to think, okay, there was an ending, there's a middle, there's a beginning. And it's not really like that. It's all already happened inside of us. But then it unfolds in the field of time, in experience, in relationships. So we want to be present to that unfoldment and trust it, really, is what it amounts to, because we realize now that what we're trusting is the emergence of the eternal truth of being. And if the ego structure becomes frightened or afraid or confused or disoriented temporarily, we say, okay, fear, confusion, disorientation, that's okay. That can happen for a little while. I understand in a deeper sense what is really at unfolding here, at work here. So I'm going to read a little characteristic here of, I never really know what I'm going to do. George came in my office this morning. I said, I have that little nervous-y feeling. Sometimes as a speaker, I've been doing this so long, nervous isn't really what it is, but sometimes there's this, and I understand that there's perhaps more of my own transformation, something deeper than I can foresee about to happen through me, and it almost always results in the service not being even close to what I imagined. And so my notes are not what I'm following, but this is a piece that's coming to me now. I want to read it to you. Anytime you have in archetypal literature, which includes all scriptures. By archetypal, I mean the primary patterns by which the relative world is being governed out of source. There are a number of kinds of archetypal patterns and various interrelationships to them. I'm teasing one friend of mine now, calling him a shaman and a magician, and I don't think those words mean anything to him. But they are a deep spiritual teaching of how those that know how to walk through things in the material world always see in the end before it's happened, and having confidence for some reason they don't even understand before it's happened. That's magician energy. So this is the one about the most fundamental of all of the archetypes, which Jung would have called the self. We call it God in Christianity and other traditions. And when this begins to manifest, it's represented as the fool or also the divine child. They're the same thing. Let me read about it a little bit. And then Moses represents this. This is why I'm talking about it. There's always, when there's a new thing about to manifest, in the beginning of the shift, the divine child emerges in some form in our awareness. So Moses' birth story, if you guys don't know it, I'm not going to tell that whole detailed thing, but he was adopted by the Pharaoh's daughter and nursed by his own mother, the Pharaoh's daughter thinking that the nurse was just a servant working for her so that he wouldn't have been. They were killing all the Hebrew children then, so that's how he avoided death, and then he emerges into the leader that takes his people out of captivity toward the promised land. So you can see an emergence of an archetypal pattern, which I would invite you to recognize as unfolding in us now. So let's just a few words about it. Moses' birth story follows the motif of the divine child archetype in many stories. The model for this particular story was the much older legend of the Mesopotamian king Sargon of Akkad. Of course, you recognize a miraculous childbirth. I mean, Jesus is the ultimate, most familiar story. But metaphysically, the birth of the divine child, metaphysically meaning, what does it represent in you and me as it moves in consciousness through the human condition and through the individual? And the undivided expression of the one, individual. Metaphysically, the birth of the divine child is the birth of the fresh, innocent, creative expression of the real self, capital S. This is not some thing. This is the formless dimension itself. She describes how this child always brings the promise of a new life. The archetype of the divine child tends to appear in advance of a transformation in the psyche. His appearance recalls the marking of eons in the history of the world, which were heralded by the appearance of an infant who overthrows an old order and with passion and inspiration begins a new one. Now, this is fairly, I mean for this to be intense, because if we do not understand and recognize that it is the overthrowing of an old order, we get involved in trying to go back and get the old rules of how to manifest something new we want. Those rules do not apply here. Not that that law isn't true. This is something more potent. So the old, we're in transition. The biggest job is to let it burn away and fall away. In fact, to participate in helping destroy the last bits of it to make room for the new order to come forth. We're torching the old false beliefs that were even valuable earlier. For example, perhaps I was raised in some spiritual tradition that really nourished me. I enjoyed the music. I felt close to Jesus or whatever it was, and certainly don't think that I have any disregard for that character within us all. But something starts to not quite feel complete or full. Something's no longer ringing true, or it isn't working fully for us. Or maybe we've been invested in some great guru or spiritual teacher or leader in a more expanded version of the truth, but they disenchant us somehow. So what we don't want to do is reinvest in another form. That's typified in the story by when the people start to murmur. They followed Moses. They like the idea of the new life. They like the promised land. But then when it gets tough out there in the wilderness, they want to build a golden calf so they have something that they can worship, that they can see, representing another false belief to put in place that's really a limitation into form rather than opening to what Moses wants to bring down the mountain, which is the real name of God within you. I am that. I am. These are the words that are uttered from within us. In Christianity, we often hear it first as we hear a voice in us saying, "Thou art the beloved child in whom I am well pleased." That's often the first breakthrough out of traditional limiting belief structures. We sense our own connectedness through those kinds of words. But this is not you are. This is I am. This is each of us hearing, oh my God. It's blasphemous, really, in many traditions, to even open to the possibility that who and what you are is the same Christ that manifested through Jesus. None of the power, none of the possibilities, none of the light, none of the fearlessness, none of the inspiration is missing as what you are. And just because it has only rarely flowered through an individual up until now does not mean that it cannot now flower in whole communities. But the same blueprint will apply. We will have to not rush back into the old structures, as valuable and good as they are. We will not have to. We can't go by the old roadmap. The rules don't apply. The rules do not apply. No matter how valuable and helpful and how well they created order in the world, because it's not possible to follow a structured rule all the way on the spiritual path and not get trapped in worshiping the rule. It's not possible to actually have the realization that I am that. I am. And then it guides us. It supplies us. It manifests magically. I use the magician. Great as grace. It just, the world of form starts to work out. Yes, it moves us. It gives us a divine idea here and there. This is what I'm here to do. This is what the next thing I'm to do is this. But without a lot less attachment or or the readopting of the old way as well as it worked. So there has to be this new, over and over again, another receptivity, another opening, no matter how far we've come. If consciousness still resides through your body with any sense of a separation and without the capacity to realize that you are the presence manifesting through everything, you can just about guess that, we have a mule egg or two in our path. And we may misunderstand what's being born and who's given birth to it. So the real principle that I'm attempting to bring us to is the one that really is the only place of certitude through any transition. And since I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that we are collectively in a fairly major transitional process, we must see, feel, know, and begin to experience the ground of our being in this ever-present holy instant. As the Course in Miracles puts it, this is the holy instant. This is it. No matter what's going on, there may be confusion, disorientation, uncertainty. There may be joy and things are working well enough. We're not assuming that transition is all about sadness or confusion or loss. It's not at all. The new earth is rising as fast as it can find an opening to come through. But it's not being dictated by the egoic structure. The egoic structure's job, its training, what's happening to the me that we thought we were, is it is being put in proper relationship to the true self. That's why it's predicated or initiated by the appearance of the divine child in some way. So, how do you summarize this? How do you walk out of here today with something moving that feels true and valid and useful in a way that we can cooperate with this? It's, I would like to give you some steps, but if I do, I'm going to be guilty of giving the ego the idea that it can do something about this. And I won't do that. You can't do this. What, if anything, there is a relative movement of attention, you are probably feeling the call. Attention, not thought, not a little self, not a little me, but attention is just drawn here in this present moment into this sensed, felt reality beneath the surface of form. And as attention flows toward that, our entire movement was built on this idea, expressed through Emma Curtis Hopkins in classes attended by the founders of Religious Science and Unity. We become that to which we give our attention. That's what comes into experience and expression. Return unto me, and I will return unto you, is the promise. Now, if we can go beneath the literal of that, that's the practice. Return. You and I both know we're going to walk out of here and forget this 1,000 times today. That's okay. If you remember it, a few more. Because every instant, every holy moment in which attention returns to Source cannot but, by spiritual law and principle, immutable as it is, express itself. This grace is looking for every opening. How many will you give it? How many times will you put the me aside and open to that mystery of being that is beyond everything you know? The question is the call. Return unto me. It's saying, this infinite dimension, if we were to give it words. And its promise is, it can't miss. It never fails. And it is the source of all power. So a deep breath in which we let go of doing a little more often, a few more times a day, until it starts happening because that's all we want to do. And then it starts to flow into all of our doings because it is the source doing through us. Huh. Isn't that right?